John Walker never imagined that his life would change in a single moment. He had been stationed on the outer colony of Alpha 5, a human settlement at the edge of the galaxy. Life here was peaceful, or at least it had been, until the Zareth. A ruthless alien species decided to make their move. They were known for their strength and warlike nature, feared across the galaxy for their ability to conquer entire civilizations. Alpha 5 had always been safe, hidden far from the galactic core, but now, that safety was shattered. John had always been a soldier, but this was different. This wasn't a battle between humans and aliens. It was an invasion. The sky above Alpha 5 turned red as the Zareth fleet descended, their massive warships blocking out the sun. The sound of explosions filled the air, and the ground shook with every blast. John, like everyone else, knew that the colony's time was running out. The attack was swift. The Zareth soldiers, with their towering figures and sleek armor, stormed through the colony, destroying everything in their path. People ran in every direction, trying to find safety, but the alien warriors were too fast, too powerful. Amid the chaos, John's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his rifle, determined to do whatever he could to protect the colony. He had trained for this moment. He had been prepared for a fight, but no one could have prepared him for what happened next. As he ran through the streets, gunfire ringing in the background, John spotted something that stopped him dead in his tracks. A small alien figure was trapped beneath a large piece of debris. It was a child, no older than 5 or 6 in human years. The creature's skin was a pale green, and its large black eyes were filled with terror as it struggled to free itself from the rubble. John hesitated, his rifle still in hand, watching the child's desperate attempts to escape. The sight of such fear in the young alien's eyes hit him harder than he expected. The Zareth had shown no mercy. Their warriors had killed hundreds of innocent people, yet here was a child, helpless and alone. John's mind raced. Should he stay and fight the Zareth? Should he leave the child to die? Or should he risk it all for a creature that was, at least to him, an enemy? Without a second thought, John made his decision. He dropped his rifle and rushed toward the rubble. The child's cries grew louder as he neared. He could feel the heat of the explosions in the distance, but his focus was on the child now. The pieces of debris were heavy, but John didn't care. He used all his strength to lift them, one piece at a time, until finally he freed the small alien. The child looked up at him, their large eyes wide with disbelief, but also a glimmer of hope. John gently scooped the child into his arms, cradling it as he stood up. But his moment of victory was short-lived. From behind him, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. He turned just in time to see a Zareth warrior, towering over, 7 feet tall, his armor gleaming in the red glow of the battlefield. The warrior's face was an expressionless mask, but John knew the look in its eyes. It was pure fury. The warrior raised its weapon, aiming directly at John, but before it could fire, another figure appeared. This time, it was a woman, or rather, a queen, the Zareth queen herself. She was even taller than the warrior, her presence commanding attention as she stepped forward with confidence. Her armor was unlike anything John had ever seen, dark and ornate, with intricate designs that seemed to shimmer in the light. "Step aside, warrior." Her voice was deep and powerful, carrying a weight that made even the warrior hesitate. John's heart raced as he looked from the queen to the soldier, then back to the child in his arms. He knew the Zareth didn't care about mercy. If the queen had come to claim her own, there would be no escape. But somehow, despite the fear gnawing at his insides, John stood his ground. He wasn't going to let this child die, not when he could do something about it. The Zareth queen's gaze shifted from the warrior to John. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. There was something unreadable in her expression, as though she was trying to understand the human standing before her. For a moment, everything was silent. No explosions, no gunfire. Just the two of them, locked in a quiet moment of understanding. "You have saved my child," the queen said, her voice soft but still carrying the weight of command. "For that I am grateful." John, still holding the child, stared at her, trying to keep his emotions in check. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had never imagined this. He had saved the child because it was the right thing to do, but now, faced with the queen of the Zareth, he had no idea what would happen next. The queen's eyes never left him. "You will come with me." John blinked, not sure he had heard her correctly. "What?" The queen's gaze hardened, her voice becoming more commanding. "You will come with me, to serve, to protect." John felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The queen's words didn't leave room for argument. This wasn't a request, it was a demand. But what could he do? Refuse her and face certain death? Or accept her offer and see where it would lead? As the explosions in the distance continued, John knew one thing for sure. His life had just changed forever. There was no going back from this. John stood in front of the Zareth queen, holding the small alien child in his arms. His heart pounded in his chest, and his thoughts raced. The explosion-filled chaos around him seemed miles away, drowned out by the presence of this powerful, alien being. The queen's eyes were cold and calculating as they studied him, making John feel small and vulnerable despite his earlier bravery. "You will come with me." Her voice was like thunder, commanding and unmistakable. The words sent a chill through John's spine. He had hoped for mercy, or at least for a way out. But the queen's gaze held no kindness. She did not see him as a hero, only as an instrument of her will. John's first instinct was to refuse, to run. His mind flashed to the colony, to his comrades, and to Earth. He had always been a soldier, prepared for battle, but nothing could have prepared him for this. He was caught in the middle of something much bigger than himself. Yet he knew that to refuse the queen was to sign his death sentence. He had already crossed a line. "Please," John found himself saying, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't understand. I just saved the child. I wasn't looking for a reward or anything in return." He looked down at the child, who seemed oddly calm now in his arms. The creature's large black eyes watched him with a curious gaze, and John couldn't help but feel a protective instinct rising inside him. Was this child truly the same species that had attacked and destroyed their colony? He had no answers, but it didn't matter. The queen raised an eyebrow, a slight but noticeable shift in her regal demeanor. "You misunderstand," she said, her voice softening just slightly. "You have saved my child. In doing so, you have earned a bond with me, whether you wish it or not." The words echoed in John's mind, and they made no sense. A bond? With an alien? Queen. He was a human, an outsider in their world, a mere soldier in the eyes of a galactic empire. What bond could they possibly share? The queen continued, as though reading his thoughts. "In the Zareth culture, saving a royal child is more than a simple act of kindness. It is a declaration of allegiance, an agreement that cannot be undone. I claim you now, human." John's head spun. "Claim me?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The queen nodded. "Yes, you will now serve me and my people. Your fate is tied to the Zareth, as is your life." Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that felt as though she were reaching into his very soul. "I have decided that you are worthy of such an honor." John stood frozen, his mind in turmoil. How had his life led him to this moment? He had always known that one day his training might bring him to the front lines of an alien war, but never in a million years did he imagine something like this. He had hoped to live out his days in peace or perhaps fight for his colony. But now he was being bound to the Zareth Queen, a ruler of a race that knew no mercy and commanded entire planets. His heart sank with the realization there was no escape from this. A deep sigh escaped his lips as he processed the Queen's words. "And what happens if I refuse?" The Queen's lips twitched into a smile, one that was more chilling than comforting. "Refuse?" she echoed. "There is no refusal. Refusal means death, and death is something that can be given swiftly. But I see the potential in you, human. I will give you a chance to prove yourself." Her words sent a shiver through John's spine, and he immediately understood that the choice before him was not a choice at all. The Queen's power was absolute, and refusing her was not an option. He had saved her child, and now he had to live with the consequences. There was no going back. "What do you want from me?" John asked, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. The Queen's gaze softened ever so slightly. "I do not need much. I require your strength, your mind, and your loyalty. The Zareth face challenges that even our warriors cannot overcome, alone. I have seen something in you, something rare among your kind." She paused for a moment, considering her words. "You have the courage to defy your own fear, and that is a strength that cannot be ignored. I would use that strength in the battles to come." John's mind raced as he processed her words. He wasn't sure what she meant, but something about her voice made him pause. There was a vulnerability to her, an unspoken burden that he hadn't noticed before. For all her power and grandeur, she seemed to be asking for help, not in the way a desperate ruler might, but in a way that suggested a deeper need. "What if I refuse again?" John asked, more to test her than out of any real hope of escape. The Queen's expression hardened again. "You would not survive to see the next dawn." John didn't doubt her. He had seen the Zareth in action. The warriors were ruthless, and the Queen was even more so. Refusing her wasn't just a matter of survival, it was a matter of choosing to live as a pawn in a galactic game he didn't understand. But as he looked at the small alien child in his arms, a thought lingered in the back of his mind. Could he be more than a pawn? Could he truly make a difference? The Queen spoke again, breaking his thoughts. "You have no choice. You will come with me to my ship. There you will learn your place, and your fate will unfold." Without waiting for a response, she turned, and with a fluid motion, she began to walk away. John hesitated for a moment, staring at the wreckage of the colony and the smoke rising in the distance. The fight had been lost, but perhaps there was still a chance to find a way to survive this strange new reality. With a deep breath, John followed. He had made his choice. There was no turning back now. John's life had taken an unexpected turn. No longer just a soldier fighting for his people, he was now bound to the Zareth Queen, a being whose power seemed beyond measure. The moments after he agreed to follow her were a blur. She led him through the wreckage of the colony, past burning buildings and crumbling structures. The sounds of battle faded as they entered a Zareth transport ship, sleek and dark, its cold metal walls offering a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The interior of the ship was unlike anything John had ever seen. It was a mixture of organic and mechanical, the walls pulsing with an eerie light, as though the ship itself were alive. There were no visible controls or panels, only the soft hum of machinery working in the background. John's senses were overwhelmed by the unfamiliarity, but the Queen's presence kept him focused. As they moved deeper into the ship, John couldn't help but glance around. His mind raced, thinking of his options. Could he escape? Would anyone from his colony come to rescue him? But the Queen's words echoed in his head. There is no refusal. The Queen led him to a spacious room near the center of the ship. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, and in the center there was a large, circular table. The room had a commanding presence, and yet it was surprisingly peaceful. The child John had saved sat silently on a cushion, its large eyes watching him with curiosity. The queen turned to John, her expression unreadable. "This is where you will stay for the time being," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We must prepare for what lies ahead." John took a deep breath. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. The queen regarded him for a moment, her dark eyes narrowing. "Your mind, your skills. I did not bring you here for nothing." She paused, almost as though choosing her next words carefully. "I have seen the potential in you, human. I believe that you can be of use to the Zareth." John frowned. "What kind of use?" Her lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You will be trained. Your mind will be sharpened. And your strength will be tested. The Zareth Empire needs new strategies, new ideas, and you, John Walker, are going to provide them." John's heart sank. This wasn't what he had expected. He had hoped to be let go to return to Earth, but now he was being groomed to serve the very Empire that had just attacked his colony. He was a prisoner, and though the Queen's words seemed like an offer, they were really an order. "I can't help you with war strategies," John said, trying to sound confident. "I'm a soldier, not a tactician." The Queen raised an eyebrow, her eyes narrowing as if she were seeing right through him. "You underestimate yourself, human. You have the instincts of a warrior, and that, more than anything, is what the Zareth need." John felt a strange mix of frustration and confusion. He was being pushed into something he didn't understand, and yet he felt the tiniest spark of something else, something that had been buried deep within him. Was there a way he could turn this situation to his advantage? Before he could respond, the child on the cushion stirred, its large eyes locking onto John. It moved closer, its tiny hands reaching up as if it wanted to be held. Without thinking, John bent down and gently lifted the child into his arms. The child gazed up at him, its alien features softening in what seemed like gratitude. The Queen observed the exchange silently, and for the first time John noticed something in her eyes. Something almost human. The Queen's expression softened, though only for a moment. "You have done more than just save my child, human. You have earned something that few will ever experience." Her voice was quieter now, almost as though she were speaking to herself. "In my empire, loyalty is everything, and loyalty is not given lightly. But you—" She paused, her gaze steady on John. "You have proven yourself worthy." John didn't know how to respond to that. "I didn't do it for loyalty. I did it because it was the right thing to do." The Queen's eyes flickered, but she said nothing for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold and commanding once again. "Yes, but you saved her life, and now you belong to me." The weight of her words hung in the air, a constant reminder of the reality John now faced. For the next few days, John was kept busy. He was shown the inner workings of the Zareth Empire, which were far more advanced than anything he had ever seen on Earth. The ship was a hub of activity, and John was quickly introduced to a group of Zareth officers who taught him the ways of their people. They were a harsh but efficient bunch, and their training methods were grueling. At first, John struggled. The alien technology and tactics were difficult to understand, and the Zareth soldiers showed him little mercy when it came to his progress. But with each passing day, he adapted. The warrior's instinct that had been honed during his time on Earth began to surface, and he found himself learning faster than he had anticipated. The Queen, though rarely present in his training, continued to watch from a distance. Her presence loomed over him, and he began to realize that she was not just a ruler, she was a force of nature. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, John sat alone in his quarters, thinking about everything that had happened. His mind was still spinning, but one thing was clear. He was no longer just a soldier. He was part of something far bigger than himself. The child, who had become his constant companion, sat next to him, its eyes wide and curious. John couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for the little creature. He had saved it, yes, but now he felt an even greater need to protect it. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time since the invasion, he felt a sense of purpose. "I don't know what's going to happen next," John muttered to the child, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I'm going to make sure you're safe. No matter what." The child seemed to understand, its tiny hand reaching out to gently touch John's arm. And for the first time, John felt that perhaps, in this strange and unpredictable galaxy, he might have found something worth fighting for. John had been aboard the Zareth ship for over a week now. The alien world that had once seemed so far away now felt like his reality. The ship, with its strange, organic design, had become his new home, and he was beginning to adapt to the peculiar routines of the Zareth. Each day he trained hard, learning their language, their combat techniques, and their ways of thinking. But it wasn't just physical strength that was tested. The Zareth valued sharp minds, strategy, and an ability to predict outcomes before they occurred. It was a game of the mind, a game in which John was determined to prove himself. Still, even as he learned more, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being used, a pawn in a far larger scheme than he could comprehend. The Queen, though she had praised him in passing, had not shown him any true kindness. She was a ruler first, and everything she did, from her gentle words to her icy commands, was to maintain control over her vast empire. John had seen the coldness in her eyes, a constant reminder that, in the end, he was just one piece in her grand game. One day, after another exhausting training session, John was summoned to the Queen's command center. It was a room unlike anything he had seen before. The walls were dark and smooth, reflecting the dim lights that hung from above. The air was thick with tension, as if the very ship itself was alive with anticipation. The Queen stood at the far end of the room, her back straight, her arms crossed. She looked every bit the ruler she was, a figure of unmatched power and authority. "Come in, John Walker." Her voice echoed in the room, commanding him to approach. John walked in, his heart beating faster. He had never felt entirely at ease in her presence, but today something was different. There was a weight in the air that he couldn't quite explain. He stood before the Queen, waiting for her to speak. "You have trained well, human," the Queen began, her tone measured but sharp. "You have learned our ways, adapted to our methods, and proven yourself capable. But this is not enough. There is more at stake now than your training. I need your full loyalty, your mind, your heart. The Zareth need a leader, someone who will stand beside me and lead us to victory." John felt a shiver run down his spine. "Lead? I'm just a soldier. I've never led anyone." The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, John thought he had angered her. But then she spoke again, her voice calm yet heavy with meaning. "Your role here, human, is to be more than just a soldier. You have something the Zareth need. Your humanity, your ability to see the world through a different lens. It is why I chose you. It is why you are here." John was silent, trying to make sense of her words. What did she mean? How could his perspective help the Zareth in their endless quest for domination? They had conquered countless worlds, and yet they still sought more. He had heard the stories of their ruthless expansion, planets falling one by one, entire species wiped out in a single sweep. How could he, a simple human, offer them something they didn't already have? The Queen stepped closer, her imposing figure casting a shadow over him. You see, John, the Zareth are a powerful people, but we are not invincible. Our enemies are growing stronger, and we need new strategies to face them. That is where you come in. John shifted uneasily. What kind of strategy are you talking about? The Queen smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only the cold, calculating demeanor that John had come to expect from her. We are facing a new threat. The Valar are a race unlike any we have encountered before. Their technology is advanced, their tactics are unpredictable, and they have begun to push into our territory. We cannot afford to make mistakes. John's mind raced. He had heard rumors about the Valar, a mysterious species known for their incredible intellect and unrelenting nature. They were not like the Zareth. The Valar didn't conquer through sheer force. Instead, they were known for their cunning, their ability to outthink their enemies before the first shot was even fired. It was no surprise that the Zareth were struggling against them. The Queen continued. The Zareth have always been a species of strength and power. But we are lacking in one area, subtlety. We crush our enemies with brute force, but against the Valar, that will not be enough. We must think differently. We must be smarter. You, John, have a way of thinking that the Zareth do not. John's brow furrowed. I'm still not sure what you want from me. You've trained me to fight, but you want me to do more. You want me to think like a tactician, to outsmart them. But I'm just a soldier, a man of action, not strategy. The Queen looked at him intently, her gaze unblinking. But you have already proven that you can think under pressure. You saved my child, not out of duty, but because it was the right thing to do. You acted not just with strength, but with compassion. It is that quality I need. The Valar will not be beaten with force alone. They will be beaten with intelligence. And that, John Walker, is where you come in. John swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. He had never considered himself a strategist, but the Queen was right. He had always acted instinctively, driven by the desire to do what was right, to protect those in need. And now, he had to use those instincts to help lead the Zareth to victory. The Queen stepped back, her expression unreadable. You will work with my top commanders. Together you will craft a plan to defeat the Valar. You will help us reclaim our strength. This is your chance, John Walker. This is your chance to prove that you belong here, by my side. John's mind raced. He had never imagined that his actions, saving the Queen's child, would lead him here. He had never thought he'd be in a position to help an empire of alien conquerors. Yet here he was, asked to lead, to outsmart one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. There was no turning back now. He had made his choice. And now he had to face the consequences. He took a deep breath and nodded. I'll do it. I'll help you. I'll help the Zareth win. The Queen's lips curled into a faint smile, a rare moment of approval. Good. You will not regret this. As she turned and walked away, John's mind swirled with thoughts of the coming battle. He had agreed to help the Zareth, but at what cost? Could he still hold on to his humanity as he became more deeply entrenched in their world? Would he ever return to Earth? Or would he be forever bound to this alien empire? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain. John Walker had just stepped into a new chapter of his life, a chapter that would determine the fate of not just the Zareth, but of the entire galaxy. The Zareth Queen's words lingered in John's mind as he sat at the strategy table, a massive circular structure that glowed softly with alien symbols. The room was filled with high-ranking Zareth officers, each one standing like stone statues, waiting for orders. The Valar had already begun to push into Zareth-controlled space, and their invasion was unlike anything the Zareth had faced before. There was no brute force in this attack. It was a war of the mind. John knew it too. He had seen the Valar ships in battle simulations, sleek, almost invisible to the eye, their weapons precise and devastating. The Zareth had always been able to overpower their enemies with sheer might, but the Valar didn't fight like that. They struck quickly with intelligence, and they left no room for error. Jon had already begun working with the Zareth commanders, but today, the pressure would reach its peak. The fate of the Empire was hanging in the balance. Jon stood at the edge of the table, surrounded by Zareth strategists and commanders who had no love for humans. They respected his mind, though, and that was what mattered. The Queen had given him a chance to prove himself, to earn his place, and now he had to deliver. The Zareth general leaned over the table, his dark eyes scanning the map of the Valar's latest movements. The Valar have reached the outer rim. If we do not act swiftly, they will breach our defenses within days. His voice was low and grave. We cannot afford to fight them in open space. They will outmaneuver us. Jon nodded, trying to focus. He had no experience fighting a war of wits like this, but the Queen had been right about one thing. He had the instincts of a warrior. A soldier always thought ahead, anticipating the next move. It was a skill he had honed for years, and now he had to apply it on a galactic scale. "We need to think like them," Jon said, his voice calm but firm. "The Valar aren't like us. They don't care about territory or resources. They care about eliminating threats before they even have a chance to rise." He turned to the map on the table. "We need to get inside their heads. We need to predict their next move and be one step ahead of them." The room fell silent. The Zareth commanders exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't used to thinking this way. The Zareth had always relied on overwhelming strength, but Jon's words struck a chord. The Valar weren't easily beaten by power alone. The Zareth admiral stepped forward, his eyes sharp. "How do you propose we do that, human?" Jon took a breath, his mind racing. He had to get this right. "We'll use a decoy strategy. We'll create multiple false targets, spaceships designed to look like our fleets. We send them on a course that the Valar will expect us to take. Meanwhile, the real fleet will be positioned elsewhere, ready to strike." The room was still. The idea was bold, risky, but it was their best chance. The Zareth had never fought a battle like this before, where deception, not strength, was the key. Jon could see it in their eyes. They weren't convinced. He wasn't a Zareth commander, after all. He was just a human. Jon looked at the Queen, who had been silent throughout the discussion. She stood at the back of the room, watching him, with cold, calculating eyes. She didn't say a word, but her gaze was enough to make him press forward. "We know that the Valar will expect us to defend our most valuable positions, so we send them the wrong signals. We need to make them think they have us cornered." Jon's voice grew more confident. "The Valar will think they're attacking our weaknesses, but they'll be wrong. Our real force will be hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back." There was a pause, a moment of doubt that hung heavy in the air. Jon could feel the tension, the hesitation. The Zareth had always been taught to fight with power, not tactics. Then, the Queen spoke. "You have convinced me, Jon Walker." Her voice was like ice, but there was a faint approval in her tone. "We will put your plan into action. But remember, if this fails, it will be your failure, not mine." Jon nodded, the weight of her words settling on him. This was it, the first real test of his worth. If the Valar outsmarted them, there would be no room for mistakes. The Zareth were ruthless, and Jon would be held accountable. "Prepare the fleet," the Queen commanded, her voice sharp. "We move out within the hour." The room erupted into a flurry of activity as the commanders began to put Jon's plan into motion. They sent out false signals, created fake ships, and prepared the fleet to move out. It was all happening so fast, there was no time to second guess. Jon's instincts told him that they were doing the right thing, but the Valar were unpredictable. This wasn't a battle of strength. This was a battle of minds, and John had to be ready for whatever the Valar threw at them. John left the strategy room, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about earning his place in the Zareth Empire. He had saved the Queen's child, and now he had to prove his loyalty, his worth. If he failed, there would be no second chance. The ship's corridors were quiet as John made his way to the command deck. The crew was already preparing for battle, their faces grim. He walked through the long hallways, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had saved the Queen's child, but that was just the beginning. Now he was part of something much bigger. As he reached the command deck, the Queen was already there, standing tall and regal, her eyes scanning the view of the fleet. "It's time," she said without turning to him. "We will face the Valar and show them what the Zareth are capable of." John stepped forward, standing by her side. The fleet was ready. The Valar had no idea what was coming. And for the first time, John felt a sense of purpose, a sense of duty. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something that could change the fate of the galaxy. Now, it was time to see if his plan would work. And if it didn't, the consequences would be more than just his failure. They would be the failure of the Zareth Empire. The battle had been long, and the stakes were higher than ever. John stood on the command deck of the Zareth flagship, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The Valar fleet was somewhere out there, waiting. The tension in the air was almost suffocating, as the entire Zareth Empire depended on their success. John had helped create the plan, one that relied on deception and misdirection, but now, as the time to strike approached, doubt crept into his mind. He had learned much since. He had arrived on the Zareth ship. His mind had expanded, his thinking sharper, his instincts honed not just for battle, but for survival in a galaxy that was far more complex than anything he had known. And yet, there was still something about the Zareth way of life that unsettled him. Their single-minded focus on power, their unyielding dominance. It was in stark contrast to the values he had grown up with on Earth. John turned away from the window and walked towards the Queen, who stood with her back to him, staring at the holographic map that displayed the movements of both the Zareth and Valar fleets. "It's almost time," the Queen said, her voice as cold as ever, but there was an unmistakable note of anticipation. "You are certain your plan will work?" John nodded, though his mind was far from certain. "It has to. It's our best chance. If we can confuse them enough, we might catch them off guard." The Queen turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Then there is no room for failure." John took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. There was no going back now. If their strategy failed, the Zareth would lose the upper hand, and the Valar would advance unchecked. It wasn't just the fate of the Zareth at stake. The entire galaxy could change if they didn't win this battle. The door to the command deck opened, and one of the Zareth officers entered, his face grim. "Commander Walker, the fleet is in position. The decoy ships are ready to go." John nodded, his heart pounding. The plan was simple. Send out a series of fake fleets, designed to draw the Valar's attention and make them believe they had found the Zareth's true weakness. The real fleet, hidden and waiting, would strike when the Valar were least expecting it. The officer's voice interrupted his thoughts. "The Valar are closing in on the false fleets. They have taken the bait." John turned to the Queen. "Now's our chance." The Queen stepped forward, her eyes glinting with determination. "Send the command. We strike now." John didn't hesitate. He turned to the officer beside him. "Activate the real fleet. Full speed ahead." The command was given, and the ship shuddered as the engines powered up. John watched as the Zareth ships began to move, their sleek forms cutting through space towards the Valar fleet. The decoy ships continued to draw the Valar away, keeping them focused on the wrong targets. It was working. The Valar were being led into a trap. But even as the Zareth fleet moved forward, Jon couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Valar were too smart. They had to know something was off. They had to suspect that it was a trick. As the Zareth ships drew closer to the Valar fleet, Jon watched the holographic map closely. "Something's not right," he muttered under his breath. The Queen turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" Jon didn't have time to explain. The Valar fleet suddenly shifted, their ships rearranging in a perfect, coordinated formation. They had figured it out. The Valar had anticipated the trap. They've adapted. They're preparing to counterattack. The Zareth ships were still advancing, but now they were headed straight into a Valar trap of their own. The decoy ships had done their job, but the Valar were moving faster than Jon had expected. The Queen's eyes flashed with fury. "No matter. We fight. We fight for our empire." But Jon knew that the odds were no longer in their favor. The Valar were too advanced, too clever. And though they had been caught off guard for a moment, they had quickly regained control. The battle was already shifting, and the Zareth were being overwhelmed. "We need to change tactics," Jon said, his mind working quickly. "We need to disrupt their fleet formation, break their lines. We can't win this in a head-to-head battle." The Queen turned to him sharply. "What do you suggest?" Jon's mind raced. He had seen the Valar's tactics. They relied on precision, coordination, and speed. If they could disrupt their communication, they could fracture their formation. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was the only shot they had left. "We'll send a small strike team to infiltrate their flagship. If we can disable their command center, we can throw them into chaos. The rest of the fleet will have to fight without a leader." The Queen considered it for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You would risk your life for this plan?" Jon didn't hesitate. "I don't have a choice." The Queen nodded slowly, a rare moment of approval in her gaze. "Then do it. And if you succeed, you will have earned your place by my side." Jon didn't wait for another word. He turned and ran to the nearest transport ship, ready to take his place in the small strike team. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. If he failed, the Zareth would fall. If he succeeded, the galaxy could change forever. As the transport ship launched into space, Jon felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't just fighting for the Zareth now. He was fighting for something bigger. A chance to prove that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, a single act of courage could make a difference. The future of the galaxy rested on his shoulders.